everybody. Last week we started talking about Genesis, the beginning of the Bible, and where everything started, everything that you see and know about, where it all came from. And we talked about how God, who is eternal, who has always been and always will be, He is the one who created the world and all things in it. In 6 days He created the world and everything in it. On the seventh day He rested. Well, now we're going to go a little farther and find out more about what happened and where we all came from. Okay, well, when God created man, when He created Adam, He created him out of the dust of the earth, the Bible says. So out of the dirt, out of the ground, He molded a man, and then He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and Adam came alive. He became a living soul. He had a soul unlike the animals. He was made in the image of God. So he was able to think and feel and appreciate the beauty around him and plan and create things because of the way that God made him. And he was a companion to God. God would actually come down and speak with Adam. Well, God wanted to make a special place for Adam to live. And so of all the plants and things that God created, He made a garden. It was called the Garden of Eden, and it had all kinds of beautiful fruit trees and flowers, and everything that was nice was in this garden. There was a river flowing through it because, as you know, plants need water to survive, and there was no rain at that time on the earth. The Bible says that instead of rain, there was a mist that came up from the ground and watered all the plants so that they would grow. And then with the addition of the river, it was just a beautiful place there in Eden. So God gave instructions to Adam. He put him in the Garden of Eden and He said, I want you to take care of this. He was giving Adam the place of ruler over the things that God created. Adam was to take care of the earth that God made. He was in charge of the animals. He was in charge of the plants. And so one of the things God got Adam to do was He brought all the animals to Adam, and Adam named them all. He gave them the names. So I don't know what language was first spoken, but if it was English, He'd be like, okay, you're an elephant, you're a kangaroo. And He just gave names to all the different animals. And God was showing Adam all the creatures that He had made by doing this, and also seeing if there was any companion for Adam, a friend for Adam, someone to talk to and share things with. But of all the creatures that God had created, all the animals, there was no one who could really share life with Adam because they couldn't talk to him. They couldn't share that soul that he had. And so God made a companion for Adam. He made a woman. How did He do that? Well, God made Adam go into a deep sleep. Just like if you have to go to the doctor and have surgery, they put you to sleep. Well, God put Adam to sleep. And while Adam was sleeping, God took one of his ribs, one of the bones in his abdomen that protects all your innards. He took a rib, and out of that rib, God made a woman. So she was made in the same type that Adam was. So with DNA and all the same body parts and things like that. And with a soul like Adam. And she was to be his companion, his helpmeet, his friend. And so God brought the woman to Adam. And Adam woke up and saw this woman, this new creature he had never seen before, and realized that although she was different from him, she was also similar to him. And he said, she is woman. Remember, he was used to giving names to things. He said, she's woman. She is taken out of man. And they were so happy together. And there they were in this beautiful garden, and they had each other for friends, They had God as a guide and friend and helper, and he would come down in the cool of the day. So in the late afternoon or evening or maybe in the morning, he would come down and he would walk with them in the garden and he would talk with them. And they were able to enjoy his presence because Adam and Eve were created innocent. They were without sin, and they didn't understand sin. There was no sin, and so they were able to walk with God. And so this went on. We aren't sure how long. God gave another instruction, though, to Adam. Before Eve was created, God gave a very, very important instruction to Adam. In the midst of all these beautiful trees and plants that were in the Garden of Eden, in the middle, God put two very special trees. And one of them was called the tree of life. And when Adam and Eve ate from it, if they kept eating from it, it would make them live forever like God. And then there was another tree, and it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said to Adam, "You can eat of any tree in the whole garden. Everything I have created, all the plants, I give to you for food. But there's one thing you must not eat. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that I've put in the middle of the garden. Don't eat from that tree or you will surely die." So there was a warning attached to this command. And so everything was fine until one day Eve met a serpent. Now we're going to have to go back in time a little bit to explain this better, okay? Now if we go back in time, later on in the Bible we hear about an angel named Lucifer. And this angel, he was a beautiful angel. He was a powerful angel. He had many angels under him in command. And he was full of music. He had to do with music in heaven. And Lucifer had a problem. He was so powerful and so beautiful, and he started to think that he was just as worthy of worship as God is. He would watch the other angels bow down and worship God and obey his commands and say, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." And he thought, I would like to be the one in charge. So it was like, if you have a captain of a ship and one of the people on the ship decides they want to be captain, then they might decide to have a mutiny. They might try and get other sailors on their side and be like, "I don't think that captain's a very good captain. You should come with me. I'll be a better captain." And that's called a mutiny. And if that happens, then that's very serious business. That person needs to get off that ship and thrown in jail or whatever. Well, in heaven, Lucifer did the same thing. He went to the other angels and he tried to get them to follow him instead. And the strange thing is that somehow he managed to get a third of the angels to follow him and not follow God. Well, of course, that can't happen. God is the one who is holy and righteous and good. He is the one that's worthy to be praised because he is God. Lucifer was just an angel. And so God threw out Lucifer and the angels that followed him out of heaven. And this all happened before God created the world. So Lucifer hates God and wants to ruin all his plans. Well, at this time, God's plan was he had created this beautiful world, this earth that we live on, and he had put it near the sun just far enough away that we didn't roast or freeze to death. He made all these beautiful plants and animals, and he made two people in the image of God to worship God and to walk with him. So Lucifer came down to the earth to ruin this whole situation. Well, what did he do? Lucifer is very tricky. If he showed up looking scary, then Eve would have run away from him. So Lucifer, he went into the body of what the Bible calls a serpent, what we would now say a snake. He went into this serpent. And back then, in the Garden of Eden, things were all different. Remember, everything was lovely. Everything God made was good. The animals didn't eat each other. There was no flies and things to come and bite them. There was no bad things anywhere in the earth. And so the serpent was not bad. It was just a beautiful creature that God had made, and it probably did not, well, we know it did not slither on the ground like it did now. We'll find out more about that in a minute. Instead, he would have had legs. And the serpent was very subtle, very smart, very tricky, and the devil, Lucifer, went inside the serpent and controlled the serpent and made it so that it could talk to Eve. And the serpent said to Eve, has God said that you can't eat of the trees of the garden? So he starts with a question, and Eve, all innocent, said, oh, we can eat of the trees of the garden. We're allowed to eat of all the trees of the garden, except for the one in the middle of the garden called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We can't eat of that or touch it, or we'll die. And the serpent said, that's not true. Oh no. The serpent said, God knows that if you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will actually get wisdom. You will be so wise. You will be like a god. Yes, you will be just like God, and you will know good from evil. And he was implying, God doesn't like you very much. He's trying to trick you. He doesn't want you to know good and evil like him. He doesn't want you to be like him. Well, poor Eve. She listened to what the serpent said. She didn't say, you are being wrong. I'm getting out of here. God is my friend, and he told me not to do that, and so I'm not going to. She listened to what the serpent said. What if he's right? And she looked at that tree with those fruits, and the Bible said that it was good looking. She looked at it. It looked good to eat. And if the serpent was telling the truth, then not only would it be good to eat, but it would make her wise. She would be like a god. Ooh. So she took that fruit that she wasn't supposed to eat, and she looked at it, and then she took a bite, and then she gave it to her husband who was with her. She gave it to Adam, and he ate of it too. Now, we don't really know how this all goes. We don't know what Adam was thinking about this. We don't know if he was really deceived or if he was just going along with what she said. Oh, go ahead, it's fine. You can eat it. Or whether he wanted to join her and whatever was going to happen to her, he wanted to do it too, or we don't really know. All we know is that Eve gave it to Adam, and Adam took a bite too. Well, this made Lucifer very happy because they had just sinned. They had just, for the first time in the history of creation, they had sinned. What would this do to the world that God had made? Adam and Eve had no idea, but Lucifer knew that this was going to be a big deal. It was just a fruit. It was just one bite, but it was a big deal. And instantly, when they ate the fruit, they knew that they had been tricked. They had been deceived. They knew that they were naked. God had not made clothes for them because they were innocent and perfect and there was no sin in all the world. But as soon as they ate the fruit, they looked down and realized they were naked. And for the first time during the time that they had been alive, for the first time, they felt bad things. Up to this point, they had only felt happiness and joy and peace, companionship and beauty and awe. When they ate that bite, all of a sudden, they felt fear and guilt and shame. And they didn't know what to do. They ran into the woods and they found some leaves and tried to somehow cover themselves up with leaves. Well, that doesn't work. I don't know if you've ever tried to make anything out of leaves. That does not work. So they were not doing a very good job of clothing themselves, and they were wondering what was going to happen because they knew they had disobeyed God, and they knew what the punishment was. The punishment was death. And they were afraid. They were overwhelmed with fear. Have you ever done anything that at the time you convinced yourself, oh, it'll be fine, or maybe you didn't even think about it, you just did it, and then as soon as you did it, you were like, that was a bad idea. I wish I could wind back the clock. I wish I could go back in time. I wish I could make a different choice. And you just with all your heart wished you could do that. I know I have done that before. I'm sure everyone has done that at some point in their life. I wish I could go back and make a different choice, but it was too late. And they were overwhelmed with fear and guilt and shame, waiting to see what would happen. Well, like God did, he came down to the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day to walk and talk with Adam and Eve. Now we know that God knows everything, but he wanted to make them tell him what had happened. So he came down and they weren't there. For the first time, Adam and Eve were not there to greet him. If you have someone you love coming to visit, then you would run to the door when you see them coming and you'd be so happy. Well, I'm sure that's what had happened before. But this time, God came and they were nowhere to be found. And he called them, Adam, Eve, Adam, where are you? And they were hiding. They were hiding because they were so afraid. And they came out and they had their leaf clothes on. And God said, what have you done? You have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, haven't you? Who told you you were naked? So obviously you ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, then God said to them, well, how did this happen? He said to Adam, what happened here? And Adam should have said, I did. I'm so sorry. I should never have done it. I disobeyed you. I sinned. I was wrong. I never should have done it, but I did eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He should have taken the blame and said yes, but he didn't. Because sin had entered into the world, sin had entered into his heart. And so Adam said, well, this woman that you gave me, she brought me the fruit and told me to eat it. Yeah, it was her. So God didn't say anything to Adam. He just looked at Eve and said, did you do this? And Eve should have said, yes, I did. I should never have done that. I feel terrible. I'm so sorry. But she didn't, because sin had entered the world. And so she said, this serpent that you made, he deceived me. He tricked me, and I ate of the fruit. And God knew what was going on in all of this. He knew that Lucifer had entered the serpent, but the serpent had let Lucifer do that. God turned to the serpent and started there and worked his way back with the punishments that would follow. He looked at the serpent and he said, because you have done this, you will crawl on your belly for the rest of time. So all serpents from that time on had to slither around on the ground in the dust of the ground. They couldn't walk on feet. They couldn't stay out of the dirt. They had to just slither around in the ground. And he said, I'm going to put enmity or hatred between you and the woman. And then he said something really interesting. God said that there would be a child from the woman. The seed of a woman would come someday. And the serpent would injure the heel of this child, or this child that would grow up, this person, but the seed of the woman, this child, this man, would crush the head of the serpent. So this is partly symbolic and maybe difficult to understand unless you look at the rest of the Bible as a whole and you understand how it all works together. You see, Adam and Eve were people that could have babies, and over time, more and more babies, more and more people were born in the seed of a woman. A man-child was born, and his name was Jesus. And Jesus was special because he was the Son of God, born to the Virgin Mary, and he walked on earth as a man. Now the serpent, not the serpent himself, but Lucifer, who had entered the serpent, he would try to hurt Jesus way off in the future. And he would manage to hurt him a little bit. As in, if you got hurt on your heel, you would get hurt a little bit. And we know that Jesus was killed. He died on the cross. But here's the thing. God said that this seed of a woman would crush the head of the serpent. We know that when Jesus died on the cross, after 3 days and 3 nights in the grave, he rose from the dead. He conquered death and sin and hell all at once by dying on the cross and raising again from the dead. And by doing that, he broke the bands of sin. He broke those chains and ruined the plans of Lucifer and crushed his head, ruined those plans that he had forever. What was Lucifer's plan? Lucifer's plan was to ruin the relationship between people and God, ruin the plan that God had to have companionship with these people that he had made, because Lucifer knew that God could not have a relationship with sinful people. God is perfect and he cannot be around sin. So from that time on, God could no longer walk in the cool of the day with Adam and Eve and talk with them because of the sin. Well, that was the punishment for the serpent. Then God moved on to Eve, and he said to Eve, well, there will be sorrow and pain in the world now. Particularly when you have children, there will be sorrow and pain. And that was her punishment for what she had done. Then God moved on to Adam and said, your punishment is that you can't live in the Garden of Eden anymore. This was made for me to have a relationship with you. And you need to be punished, so you can no longer have it nice and easy and beautiful in the Garden of Eden. You're going to have to go and work really, really hard. You're going to have to go out into the fields of the world, and things aren't going to grow as well as they used to. There's going to be dust instead of being well watered. It's going to get dry. The plants aren't going to grow so good. There's going to be thorns and thistles and weeds that you're going to have to pull out of your garden, and it's going to get really hot, and there's going to be flies that bite you and sting you. And the animals started to eat each other and threaten the humans that God had made. All the terrible things in the world, all the bad things in the world began on that day. So Adam and Eve had to leave the Garden of Eden. They were no longer able to live there. They had to go out and make their own way in the world. They had to plant their own plants and harvest their own food and find a way to live in this new world that was filled with sickness and pain and suffering, the knowledge of sin, the desire to sin. All of these things came on that day. Well, then they still needed clothes to wear. Those fig leaves, they were not working, so God made clothes for Adam and Eve. He made them out of animal skin. Well, if you have animal skin, then I'm afraid that means that an animal has to die. And so God made clothes for Adam and Eve, and this was the beginning of death. Remember, the punishment for eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God had told them the punishment was death. It would be death, that everything God created would eventually die, and Adam and Eve themselves would eventually die. There was something about this, though, that points to the future. This symbolized these animal skin clothing that God made for Adam and Eve. The fact that an animal had to die symbolized to them and showed them that because of their sin, there would be death, and it was their fault. And this would continue. However, we know that someday Jesus himself, an animal had to die for them to be clothed, to cover their nakedness. And someday God was going to send his son Jesus to die on the cross to pay the penalty, the punishment for the sins of Adam and Eve and every person who ever lived after them, because every child that was ever born after that had sin in their lives. And they couldn't get away from it. Every person ever born has sin, and they can't go and have a relationship with Jesus. So the only way that they could have a relationship with God was for that sin to be punished. But no person in the world could take the punishment because they were all sinners. So God sent his son Jesus, who never sinned, to take the punishment on behalf of all the people of the world. Just like the animal who clothed Adam and Eve was innocent, had never sinned. Jesus was innocent. He never sinned, but he took the punishment for all the people who would ever live in the whole world for their sins, so that they could be clothed in the white robes of righteousness and go to heaven someday to be with God and have that communion just like Adam and Eve used to have in the Garden of Eden. And therefore they could be close to God because their sin would be covered by the righteousness of Jesus, just like the animal skin covered the nakedness of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve had clothes, and they were sent away from the garden, and God sent cherubims. He sent angels down from heaven with a flaming sword that turned every which way to keep Adam and Eve and any children that they had away from the Garden of Eden and the tree of life. Remember that tree of life that could have made them live forever? It kept them away so that they wouldn't live forever in their sin. Their punishment was death. Well, Adam and Eve, I'm just going to quickly go to the next section because it's very short. Adam and Eve had two sons that we know of right away. They had a son named Cain and a son named Abel. And Cain, he liked to work in the fields and garden. And Abel liked to take care of sheep. So that's what they did for their jobs. They each had something that they did. Abel looked after the sheep, and Cain grew food to eat. So, one day, Cain and Abel decided that they wanted to give a gift to God. And Cain brought the fruits and vegetables, the food that he had grown. And Abel brought the best lamb out of his flock to give to the Lord. And God chose Abel's gift. Remember that a lamb is the symbol of Jesus. It was a lamb had to die for the sacrifice of the sins in the Old Testament. And Jesus, it was a symbol of Jesus dying later on so that our sins could be taken away. So God said, I choose Abel's gift. Well, this made Cain very angry. Cain felt like mine's just as good as his. How come he gets accepted and I don't? That's just not fair. And God said, he came down and talked to Cain, and he said, why are you angry? Why on earth? What right have you to be angry? If you do well, if you make good choices, then you will be accepted like your brother. Hello, this is not a problem. You just have to make good choices, and then you also will be accepted. In other words, you go get a lamb too, and everything will be fine. But Cain did not like this. He wanted to come to God on his own terms. He didn't want God to say, this is the gift I would like to receive. He wanted to choose the gift to give to God and say, this is just as good. I worked really hard in the garden, so you should accept it. But God had a plan, and the lamb was part of his plan. And so it was much more than just what gift they were bringing. It had a symbolism that would last through eternity. Cain did not want to listen to God. He was still angry. And one day when he and Abel were out in a field all alone, Cain was so mad about this that he killed his brother Abel. This was the first murder in the world. And it just showed how sin was in their hearts, and it was just growing and continuing down through the generations. So Adam and Eve had sinned, then Cain had sinned, he killed his brother. And later, God gave Eve a new son that she called Seth, in place of Abel, who was dead. And Cain, I'm afraid, had to be punished. So God knew what had happened. He knows everything. No matter where we try to hide, he can find us. We couldn't go anywhere that he wouldn't know where we were. And so God spoke to Cain again when Cain was in the field. He said, oh, Cain, where's your brother Abel? And Cain, he did not have a good attitude. He was like, well, how do I know? Am I my brother's keeper? Like, am I supposed to be in charge of him? I don't know where he is. And God said, I know where he is. His blood is crying to me from the ground where you spilled it. He's like, you can't hide from me. I know what happened. And so Cain's punishment was that he was not going to be able to garden anymore. Remember how much he liked garden? That was important to him. And God said, now when you plant your seeds, they are not going to grow. You're not going to be a gardener anymore. And he said, you're going to need to go out from here and wander throughout the earth. You're not going to be able to settle down here. You need to leave. And Cain was like, oh, it's too hard. It's too much of a punishment. If people see me, they're going to hear what I did and they're going to kill me. And so God said, I will put a mark on you to show that no one is allowed to kill you. But you're going to wander and you won't be able to grow anything. And so that's what happened to Cain. And his family didn't turn out very well either, as you can imagine, because he didn't repent for his sin. He wasn't sorry. He just didn't like his punishment. Now Seth, the child that God gave to Eve to replace Abel, who died, he grew to be a good man. And he had a son that he called Enos. And then men began to call on the name of the Lord. And so through the line of Seth, through his children, these were good men who desired, who wanted to follow God and obey him, just like Abel would have if he had been alive. So that's all I have for you today. It was a very important lesson. I hope it all made sense. It was a long lesson. I hope you stuck with me to the end. And more next week. Thanks.